Picture this. You wake up in your apartment. Something feels wrong. There are sticky notes everywhere. On your desk, your computer monitor, your refrigerator, notes you don't remember writing. They're in your handwriting. But the messages are strange. Warnings. Accusations. Someone is breaking into your home, leaving these notes while you sleep. Or at least, that's what you think. You post on Reddit, desperate for legal advice. You're convinced your landlord has a spare key and is gaslighting you. Hundreds of people respond with sympathy, outrage, suggestions to call the police. But then, one comment changes everything. One user asks a simple question that saves your life. Do you have a carbon monoxide detector? You don't. The truth hits like a freight train. There is no intruder. There never was. You've been poisoning yourself for weeks, writing notes in a fugue state, your brain slowly suffocating from odorless gas filling your apartment. If that Reddit comment hadn't appeared, you might not have survived another week. This is a true story, and it's just one of 13 deeply disturbing mysteries I found while diving into the darkest corners of Reddit. Some of these stories have explanations. Others remain unsolved to this day. But all of them will leave you questioning reality, safety, and what might be lurking just beyond the edge of your perception. I'm going to take you through cases that range from terrifying stalkers to impossible coincidences, from missing persons to glitches in reality itself. These aren't creepypastas or fiction. These are real posts from real people who experienced something they couldn't explain, something that changed them forever. So turn off the lights, make sure your doors are locked, and whatever you do, don't read the comments section alone at night. Let's begin. Our first story comes from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, posted by a user who we'll call Aaron. This happened when he was living in Seattle, working the night shift at a 24-hour coffee shop. His schedule was brutal, finishing work at 2 in the morning and walking home through empty streets. But Aaron didn't mind. He actually enjoyed the solitude, the quiet city, the sense of having the world to himself, until the night he encountered the smiling man. It was 3 a.m. Aaron was walking down a residential street, not particularly well lit but not pitch black either. The kind of street where you can see about half a block ahead. He noticed movement in his peripheral vision and looked up. There was a man at the far end of the street, but he wasn't walking normally. He was dancing, or rather, doing something that resembled dancing but felt fundamentally wrong. The figure moved in a strange, jerky rhythm, stepping forward, swaying side to side, arms swinging in exaggerated arcs, like a marionette operated by someone who'd only heard dancing described but never seen it. Aaron stopped walking. Something primal in his brain was screaming at him that this wasn't right. The dancing man was getting closer, not walking toward Aaron directly, but zigzagging across the street in that bizarre, rhythmic pattern. And as the distance closed, Aaron could make out more details. The man was tall, wearing a suit that looked decades out of style, and he was smiling, not a normal smile, an impossibly wide grin that seemed to split his face in half. The smiling man hadn't acknowledged Aaron yet. He continued his grotesque dance, getting closer with each passing second. Aaron's instincts kicked in. He crossed to the other side of the street, trying to put distance between himself and this nightmare figure. That's when the smiling man stopped. He turned his head. Only his head, his body remaining perfectly still, and locked eyes with Aaron. The smile never faltered. For 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, they stared at each other across the empty street. Then the smiling man began dancing again. But this time he was dancing directly toward Aaron. Faster, now, that horrible grin never changing, never blinking, closing the distance with unnatural speed. Aaron ran. He didn't think, didn't rationalize, just turned and sprinted down the street as fast as his legs could carry him. Behind him, he could hear the slapping of dress shoes on pavement, keeping pace. He risked a glance backward and immediately wished he hadn't. The smiling man was no longer dancing. He was sprinting on all fours like an animal, that grotesque smile still plastered across his face, suit jacket flapping behind him. Aaron's apartment was still 4 blocks away. He'd never make it. His lungs were burning, his legs screaming. He spotted a convenience store with lights on and practically threw himself through the door. The clerk looked startled as Aaron collapsed against the counter, gasping for breath, begging them to lock the door. Through the window, Aaron watched the smiling man slow to a stop about 20 feet from the store entrance. He stood there, perfectly still, watching, smiling. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away, his movements now completely normal, as if nothing had happened. The clerk called the police. When they arrived, Aaron tried to explain what he'd seen, but he could tell from their expressions they thought he'd been high or having a mental break. They searched the area. Found nothing. Aaron never worked the night shift again. He moved to a different neighborhood within a month. And to this day, over a decade later, he can still see that smile in his nightmares. Too wide, too perfect, too wrong. The post gained thousands of comments. Dozens of people shared similar experiences. Encounters with a man who smiled too much, danced in ways that defied normal human movement, appeared in empty streets at night. Some thought it was the same individual. Others speculated it was a shared urban legend, a collective unconscious fear manifesting in similar reports. But Aaron knows what he saw. And more importantly, he knows what he felt in that moment when their eyes met. Not human. Something wearing a human shape, but fundamentally wrong underneath. The smiling man was never identified. He was never caught. And somewhere out there, he might still be dancing through empty streets, waiting for the next person walking alone at night. Now let me tell you the full story behind that opening hook, because the details are even more disturbing than you might imagine. The user, we'll call him Tom, posted on the legal advice subreddit with what seemed like a straightforward problem. His landlord, he believed, was entering his apartment without permission and leaving sticky notes everywhere. The notes contained strange messages, sometimes coherent, sometimes rambling. Some appeared to be reminders he'd supposedly written to himself but had no memory of creating. Tom's post was detailed and lucid. He explained that he'd been living in this apartment for about 8 months. The sticky notes had started appearing a few weeks ago. At first, just 1 or 2. He dismissed them as notes he'd actually written and forgotten about. But then they multiplied. Notes on his desk accusing someone of moving his things. Notes on the refrigerator with grocery lists he didn't write. Notes on his computer monitor warning himself about the man upstairs. He had no memory of writing any of them. Tom's immediate conclusion was that his landlord was gaslighting him, possibly trying to make him think he was losing his mind so he'd break the lease. He'd noticed his things being moved around, his mail tampered with. He was convinced someone with a key was entering while he was at work or sleeping. The Reddit community responded with outrage. Commenters advised him to install cameras, change his locks, file police reports, consider getting a lawyer. The post gained traction quickly. Hundreds of upvotes, dozens of comments offering support and legal strategies. Then, buried in the thread, a user named Kakerlak asked the question that changed everything. Do you have a carbon monoxide detector in your apartment? Can you check? Tom didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his comment sent chills through everyone reading the thread. I don't think I do. I'll check when I get home. Kakerlak followed up with urgency. Get out of your apartment right now. Go to a hospital and tell them you might have carbon monoxide poisoning. Do it now. What happened next was documented in real time on Reddit. Tom went to the emergency room. His blood tests showed dangerously elevated levels of carboxyhemoglobin. The compound formed when carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin in your blood, preventing oxygen from reaching your tissues and organs. The doctors were shocked he was still alive. Carbon monoxide poisoning has insidious symptoms: memory loss, confusion, hallucinations, disorientation. In Tom's case, he'd been experiencing these symptoms for weeks, possibly months. He would write sticky notes while in a fugue state, his brain starved of oxygen, then forget he'd written them. He'd move his own belongings and have no recollection. His perception of time was distorted. He thought his landlord was gaslighting him, when in reality he was gaslighting himself. The source of the carbon monoxide: a faulty heating system in his apartment building, odorless, colorless, undetectable, without proper equipment, silently filling his living space every night as he slept, slowly poisoning him, degrading his cognitive function week by week. If Kakerlak hadn't asked that question, Tom would likely have died in that apartment within days. He would have continued dismissing his symptoms as stress or lack of sleep. He would have kept breathing in poison until his body simply shut down. The post became legendary on Reddit. It's cited frequently as an example of why online communities, despite their flaws, can literally save lives. Kakerlak, who happened to be an attorney specializing in landlord-tenant law, had seen cases involving carbon monoxide poisoning before and recognized the pattern of symptoms Tom described. Tom made a full recovery. He never returned to that apartment. The building was inspected, and multiple units were found to have dangerous carbon monoxide leaks. The landlord faced serious legal consequences. But here's what keeps me up at night about this story. How many other people have experienced something similar, but never got that crucial comment? How many hauntings or gaslighting incidents are actually undetected carbon monoxide poisoning? How many people have died thinking they were losing their minds, when in reality, they were being slowly asphyxiated by their own homes? Carbon monoxide detectors cost about $20. After reading Tom's story, the first thing I did was check every single detector in my house. I suggest you do the same, because the most terrifying mysteries are often the ones with simple, horrible explanations. This next story comes from a woman we'll call Rachel, and it involves a medical professional who used his position of trust to attempt something absolutely horrifying. Rachel was in her mid-20s, living alone in a medium-sized city in the Midwest. She'd been experiencing severe abdominal pain and made an appointment with a gastroenterologist she'd found through her insurance network. Dr. Ramsey, not his real name, had good reviews online, a respectable practice, and seemed professional during her initial consultation. He recommended she come in for a procedure that required anesthesia. Rachel would need someone to drive her home afterward, but she didn't have family in the area and felt embarrassed asking friends. When she mentioned this concern, Dr. Ramsey offered a solution. "I have a patient transportation service I sometimes arrange for people in your situation," he told her. "A medical driver who can pick you up after the procedure and make sure you get home safely." Rachel was relieved. The doctor even said the service would be complimentary, covered by the practice. She scheduled the procedure for the following week. The day arrived. The procedure went smoothly. Rachel woke up groggy in the recovery room, and a nurse informed her that her ride had arrived. She was wheeled out to the parking lot where a man waited beside a dark sedan. He introduced himself as Michael and said Dr. Ramsey had sent him. Something felt wrong immediately. Michael wasn't wearing any kind of uniform. The car had no company markings, but Rachel was still foggy from the anesthesia, and the nurse had walked her out personally, so she pushed down her instincts and got in the car. Michael started driving. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. He made small talk, asked how she was feeling, but then Rachel noticed they weren't heading toward her neighborhood. She mentioned this, and Michael said he needed to make a quick stop first to pick up some medical supplies. His story didn't make sense, but Rachel's brain was still swimming from the drugs. They pulled into a residential area Rachel didn't recognize. Michael parked in front of a house and turned off the engine. That's when Rachel's survival instincts finally broke through the pharmaceutical haze. "I need to go home now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Michael smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Just come inside for a minute. The doctor wanted me to check your vitals before dropping you off." Rachel's blood went cold. She reached for the door handle. Locked. Michael had engaged the child locks. "Let me out," Rachel said. Louder now. Michael's demeanor changed completely. The friendly mask dropped. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you, or this is going to be very difficult for you." What Michael didn't know was that Rachel, despite being groggy, had her phone in her pocket. While he was talking, she managed to dial 911 without looking, praying the call would connect. She started talking loudly, clearly. "My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm being held in a dark blue sedan. The driver says he works for Dr. Ramsey at Midwest Gastro, but I don't know where I am." Michael lunged for her phone, but the damage was done. The 911 operator had heard everything. Rachel screamed, fought, kept screaming. A neighbor came out of a nearby house. Michael made a split-second decision and fled, running from the car and disappearing between houses. Police arrived within minutes. Rachel was taken to a hospital, and when investigators started digging into Dr. Ramsey and his patient transportation service, the truth emerged. There was no transportation service. There never had been. Dr. Ramsey had been identifying vulnerable patients, women living alone, without local support networks, and arranging for his accomplice Michael to abduct them while they were still impaired from anesthesia. What they planned to do with these women was never fully confirmed in court, but evidence found in Michael's home suggested intentions far more horrific than robbery. Rachel was the first victim to escape, but she wasn't the first target. Police found evidence of at least 3 other women who had been transported by Michael after procedures with Dr. Ramsey. 2 of those women couldn't be located. They remain missing to this day. Dr. Ramsey and Michael were both arrested. Both were convicted, but the case raised disturbing questions about how long this had been happening, and how many victims there might have been before Rachel's narrow escape. Rachel posted her story on Let's Not Meet as a warning. She wanted other people, especially women, to know that predators can wear white coats and have medical degrees. That the person who seems the most trustworthy might be the most dangerous. That you should never, ever get in a car with someone you don't know, no matter who sent them, no matter how official they seem. Her instincts saved her life, and her willingness to share her story may have saved countless others from falling into the same trap. But I think about those two missing women sometimes. I think about how close Rachel came to becoming the third, and I wonder how many other Dr. Ramseys are out there, hiding behind credentials and professional smiles, waiting for the next vulnerable patient to walk through their door. From predators in white coats, we move to a mystery that has baffled investigators for over 2 decades. This is the disappearance of Zeb Quinn, and it contains details so bizarre that they seem impossible. Yet every word is documented fact. Zeb Quinn was 18 years old in January 2000. He lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and worked at a Walmart while saving money for college. On January 2nd, Zeb and his co-worker Robert Jason Owens were test driving cars at a local dealership. This was around 9 p.m. During the test drive, Zeb received a page. Remember, this was 2000. Cell phones weren't ubiquitous yet, and many young people still used pagers. Zeb looked at the number and told Owens he needed to make a phone call right away. They drove to a nearby convenience store. Zeb used the payphone while Owens waited in the car. When Zeb returned, witnesses later said he looked upset, almost panicked. He told Owens he needed to go help his mother with something urgent. Owens drove them back to the parking lot where Zeb's car was parked. Zeb got in his vehicle, a 1982 Pontiac, and drove away. Owens went home. That was the last confirmed sighting of Zeb Quinn alive. 2 weeks later, Zeb's car was found in a restaurant parking lot about 20 miles from where he'd last been seen. The location of the vehicle was strange enough, but what was inside defied explanation. The car had been carefully cleaned, wiped down to remove fingerprints. But investigators found several items that hadn't been there before. A live puppy, a Labrador, maybe 6 weeks old, was in the back seat with a makeshift bed of blankets. Several bottles of water and dog food were arranged neatly beside it. Someone had been caring for this puppy inside Zeb's abandoned car. On the windshield, drawn in pink lipstick, was a pair of lips, a kiss mark, nothing else. Just that single, bizarre symbol. Inside the car, investigators found hotel receipts from the night Zeb disappeared. The receipts were from a hotel about 15 miles away. But when police checked the hotel's records, they found something impossible. The room had been paid for in cash by someone giving Zeb's name, but the physical description provided by the hotel clerk didn't match Zeb at all. Who was staying in a hotel under Zeb's name on the night he vanished? Who put a puppy in his car? Who drew lips on the windshield? And most importantly, where was Zeb? The investigation focused heavily on Robert Jason Owens, the last person known to have seen Zeb. Owens claimed he went straight home after dropping Zeb off and knew nothing about what happened next. His story remained consistent through multiple interviews. Police had suspicions but no evidence. Years passed. The case went cold. Zeb's family never stopped searching, never stopped asking questions. But answers seemed impossible to find. Then, in 2017, 17 years after Zeb disappeared, police in Asheville were investigating an unrelated case. They were searching property owned by Robert Jason Owens' mother when they made a horrific discovery. Human remains buried on the property. The remains were identified as belonging to Zeb Quinn. Owens was arrested and charged with murder, but even with his arrest, the mystery deepened rather than resolved. Owens refused to explain what happened. He wouldn't discuss the puppy, the lipstick, the hotel room, or how Zeb's body ended up buried on his mother's property. The prosecution theorized that Owens had lured Zeb away that night, possibly using a fake emergency call on his pager. That Owens had murdered him shortly after they separated. But the bizarre staging of the car, the puppy, the lipstick, these details suggested something far more complex and disturbing than a simple murder. Some investigators believe Owens didn't act alone. The care taken with the puppy, the theatrical nature of the lipstick kiss, these elements suggest someone else was involved, someone who wanted to send a message or create confusion. But who and why? Owens was convicted based on the physical evidence, the body found on his family's property. But he never confessed, never explained. The trial left more questions than answers. Zeb's family finally had closure, in a sense. They knew he was dead. They knew roughly when it happened. But the why and the how, the bizarre details that made this case so haunting, those remain mysteries. And that puppy, cared for in an abandoned car for 2 weeks, still haunts everyone who worked the case. Someone fed that dog, gave it water, made sure it stayed alive. While Zeb Quinn was already dead, buried in the ground, someone was taking care of a puppy in his car and leaving kiss marks on the windshield. What kind of person does that? What kind of mind stages such a grotesque tableau? We may never know. And sometimes, the unanswered questions are more terrifying than any explanation could ever be. While that case dealt with physical mystery and murder, our next story ventures into something far stranger. Something that challenges our understanding of consciousness, memory, and reality itself. This comes from the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit, posted by a user we'll call Marcus. And fair warning, this story is going to make you question everything you think you know about the nature of existence. Marcus wrote that when he was in his early 20s, he was in a severe car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit his vehicle at high speed. Marcus sustained a traumatic brain injury and was in a coma for several days. But from Marcus's perspective, he never lost consciousness. He remembers the impact, the sound of metal crunching, glass exploding, pain. And then nothing dramatic, he got out of the wrecked car with minor injuries. An ambulance came, he was checked out and released. Life continued. He went back to his apartment, back to his job. Weeks passed, then months. Marcus met a woman named Sarah at a coffee shop. They started dating. The relationship progressed quickly, intensely. Within a year, they were married. Marcus's life continued. He and Sarah bought a house. They had careers, friends, routines. They talked about having children. Marcus remembers every detail of this life with crystalline clarity. The way Sarah laughed, the color of the walls in their bedroom, the coffee shop where they had their first date. 5 years of memories, vivid and real. Then one day, Marcus was sitting in his living room, reading. He glanced up at the lamp on the table beside him. A simple floor lamp, nothing special. But something about it seemed wrong. The way the light fell, the angle of the shade. He couldn't stop staring at it. The more he stared, the more wrong it seemed. Not just wrong, impossible. The shadows it cast didn't make sense. The light itself seemed to shimmer and distort. Marcus felt a rising sense of panic, though he couldn't explain why. This lamp, this ordinary object, suddenly felt like the most important and terrifying thing in the world. He reached out to touch it, and the world ended. Marcus woke up in a hospital bed. His parents were beside him, crying with relief. Doctors and nurses surrounded him. He'd been in a coma for 8 days. 8 days. Not 5 years. 8 days. There was no Sarah. They'd never met, never married. The house didn't exist. The job he remembered having, the friends he'd made, the life he'd lived, none of it was real. It had all happened inside his comatose brain, a dream that felt like years compressed into just over a week of real time. Marcus's post on Reddit was raw with grief. He described the profound sense of loss, of mourning for a life that never existed. He mourned Sarah, who wasn't real. He mourned the person he'd become in that dream life. He struggled to accept that the years of memories in his head were false, while the reality he'd woken up to, where those years had never happened, was true. The lamp haunted him most of all. In his comatose dream, his subconscious mind had created an entire reality, but it couldn't maintain perfect consistency. The lamp, some glitch in his brain simulation, had broken the illusion. Once he'd noticed the impossibility of it, the entire constructed reality collapsed. Other users flooded the comments with similar stories. People who'd experienced comas, severe drug experiences, or near-death events, and lived entire lifetimes in their heads before waking up to discover only hours or days had passed. The phenomenon is rare but documented. The brain, under extreme stress, can generate remarkably detailed false realities. But here's what makes Marcus's story so disturbing. He ended his post with a question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I first read it. How do I know I'm really awake now? How do I know this reality isn't another dream, and I'm still in that hospital bed? What if I'm still in the coma, and this is just another layer? What if I notice something wrong with this reality, like I did with the lamp, and I wake up somewhere else entirely? And then he asked the question that probably keeps you up at night too. If you really think about it, how do you know you're awake? How do you know you didn't slip into a coma years ago, and everything you remember since then is just a dream? How do you know that the life you're living right now is the real one? What's your lamp? What small detail in your reality might not make sense if you looked at it too closely? And what would happen if you found it? Marcus never posted again after that. His account went dark. I don't know if he found peace with his experience, or if he's still searching for another crack in reality, terrified that this world might collapse too. But I'll tell you what I do know. Since reading his story, I sometimes catch myself staring at objects in my room, looking for inconsistencies, checking shadows, angles, details, looking for my own impossible lamp, and I'm never quite sure if I want to find it or not. From the horror of false realities, we return to physical terror. This next story is short, but it's stayed with thousands of Reddit users since it was first posted. It comes from Let's Not Meet, from a user we'll call Kelly. Kelly was 15 years old when this happened. She lived in a small town in rural Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and violent crime was virtually non-existent. One evening in summer, Kelly was walking home from a friend's house around sunset. She had to cross a small bridge over a creek to reach her neighborhood. As she approached the bridge, she noticed a man standing at the far end. He was facing away from her, looking down at the water. Nothing obviously threatening, but something made Kelly slow down. Some instinct told her to be careful. She stepped onto the bridge, her footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. The man didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her presence. Kelly walked slowly, staying as far from him as possible on the narrow bridge. When she was about halfway across, the man spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Don't look down," he said. Kelly froze. The man still hadn't turned around. He continued staring at the water below. "Just keep walking," he said. "Don't look down. Don't stop, just walk." Every instinct in Kelly's body screamed at her to run, but something in the man's tone, the complete lack of inflection, the strange warning, paralyzed her. She forced herself to keep walking, faster now, her eyes locked straight ahead. She didn't look at the man as she passed him, didn't look down at the water, just walked as quickly as she could without running. When she reached the end of the bridge, she couldn't help it. She looked back. The man was gone, completely vanished. There was nowhere for him to have gone in the few seconds since she'd passed him. The bridge was elevated over the creek, at least 15 feet above the water, with steep banks on either side. He couldn't have climbed down that fast. He couldn't have run past her. He was just gone. And then Kelly made her mistake. She looked down at the water below the bridge. There was someone in the creek, a figure, half submerged in the shallow water, wedged between rocks. From Kelly's angle, she couldn't tell if it was a person or maybe a mannequin, some strange piece of debris. But the shape was distinctly human. Arms, legs, a head. Kelly ran home and told her parents. They called the police. When officers went to investigate, they found nothing. No body in the creek, no evidence anyone had been there. The water was shallow enough that if something had been wedged in those rocks, it couldn't have floated away. Kelly never saw the man again. Never got an explanation for what she'd seen, or thought she'd seen, in the water. But she never crossed that bridge alone after sunset again. The comments on her post offered various theories. Some thought the man was a ghost, warning her away from the place where he'd died. Others suggested he was a potential attacker who changed his mind when he realized Kelly had seen his face, the body in the water being a previous victim he'd been admiring. But the theory that disturbs me most came from a user who claimed to be a retired police officer. He suggested that Kelly had stumbled onto an active crime scene, that the man was in the process of disposing of a body when Kelly appeared. His warning, "Don't look down," was an attempt to get her to pass without noticing. When she looked back and he'd vanished, he'd probably hidden beneath the bridge, waiting for her to leave before finishing his work. The fact that police found nothing when they arrived hours later supports this theory. The killer would have had plenty of time to remove the body and any evidence. If that theory is true, then Kelly's instinct to keep walking, to not stop or confront the man, likely saved her life. If she'd panicked, tried to run, or questioned him, she might have become the second body in that creek. But we'll never know for certain. And Kelly will never know if she witnessed a ghost, a hallucination, or a murderer in the act. All she knows is that something deeply wrong was happening on that bridge, and she escaped. Barely. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do when confronted with the inexplicable is exactly what that man told Kelly. Don't stop. Don't look. Just walk away. Our next case takes us from a small town bridge to international headlines. This is the story of Lars Mittink, and it might be the most baffling disappearance ever captured on video. Lars was a 28-year-old German man who went on vacation to Bulgaria in July 2014 with some friends. They were there for a week, partying and enjoying the beach. On the last night of their trip, Lars got into a fight with some other tourists at a bar. He was hit in the head, suffered a ruptured eardrum, and was advised by a doctor not to fly home until it healed, as the pressure changes could cause serious complications. Lars's friends had to return to Germany for work. They didn't want to leave him, but Lars insisted he'd be fine. He'd stay a few extra days, let his ear heal, then fly home. His friends left, and Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport to wait for medical clearance to fly. This is where things get strange. Lars began calling his mother multiple times a day, which was unusual for him. He sounded paranoid, frightened. He told her he thought people were following him. He claimed the men he'd fought with at the bar had tracked him to his hotel and were stalking him. He said he didn't feel safe. His mother tried to calm him down, suggested he was just stressed and anxious from being alone in a foreign country with an injury. But Lars's paranoia intensified. He told her he'd left his hotel and found a different place to stay, but he wouldn't tell her where. He said he couldn't trust anyone. The doctor cleared him to fly on July 8th. Lars went to the airport that morning. His mother had wired him money for a ticket, which he picked up from a Western Union in the airport terminal. Security footage shows him collecting the cash, then going to book a flight. What happened next was captured on the airport security cameras and has been viewed millions of times online. Lars is seen sitting in the airport doctor's office, apparently getting a final medical check before his flight. He appears agitated, nervous. Suddenly, without warning, he stands up, grabs his bag, and runs out of the office. The doctor tries to stop him, but Lars pushes past. The security footage shows Lars sprinting through the airport terminal, moving at full speed, his face contorted with absolute terror. He runs out of the building, through the parking lot, and toward a fence at the edge of the airport property. He drops his luggage, climbs over the fence, and runs into a large forest area that borders the airport. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank. He vanished into those woods and was never seen again. The search was massive. Bulgarian authorities, German police, private investigators, search dogs, helicopters. Nothing found any trace of him. No body, no belongings except the luggage he'd dropped. No evidence of where he went or what happened. But here's where the mystery deepens. Forensic analysis of the security footage shows something disturbing. Lars's behavior in those final moments doesn't look like someone running from physical pursuers. He doesn't look behind him, doesn't check if anyone's following. He runs as if he's fleeing from something only he can see. Some theories suggest Lars was suffering from a severe concussion from the fight, one that progressively worsened and caused paranoid delusions. The ruptured eardrum might have been a symptom of a more serious brain injury that went undiagnosed. By the time he reached the airport, he may have been experiencing psychosis, hallucinating threats that weren't real. Other theories are darker. Some believe the men Lars fought with really were tracking him, that his paranoia was justified, that they followed him to the airport and he ran to escape them, only to be caught in the forest and killed. But if that's true, why was no body ever found? Why no evidence? Another theory suggests Lars fell victim to human trafficking, that criminals operating around the airport saw a vulnerable, isolated tourist and abducted him when he ran into the woods. But again, there's no evidence to support this. The most haunting theory, to me, comes from psychologists who analyzed the footage. They suggest Lars was experiencing a complete psychiatric break, possibly drug-induced, possibly from the head injury, that he ran into the forest in a state of absolute terror, convinced he was being pursued by something that didn't exist, and either died from exposure, from an accident, or took his own life to escape the perceived threat. His body could be anywhere in those vast woods, in a location no search team has found. Lars's family has never stopped looking for him. The security footage of his final moments, his terror captured in high definition, has made this one of the most famous missing person cases in Europe. You can watch the video yourself online. It's been analyzed frame by thousands of amateur investigators, but no amount of analysis answers the fundamental questions. What was Lars running from? What did he see or think he saw that filled him with such overwhelming fear? And where is he now? If he's still alive, which seems unlikely after so many years, what happened to him in those woods? And if he's dead, why hasn't anyone found his remains? The most disturbing possibility, to me, is the simplest one, that Lars was running from nothing, that his own mind betrayed him, filled his perception with threats that didn't exist, and drove him into those woods where he died alone and terrified, fleeing from shadows. And somewhere in a Bulgarian forest, his body remains undiscovered, while his final moments of terror play on repeat for millions of viewers online. The image of him running, that look of absolute panic frozen on his face, it haunts everyone who's seen it, because we all know that look. We've all felt that kind of primal fear, even if just for a moment. The fear that something is wrong, something is chasing you, something wants to hurt you. But what if that feeling never goes away? What if your brain locks into that state of terror and you can't escape it? That's what I see in Lars Mittink's face in that security footage. A man trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from, and he ran into the forest to escape it. While Lars's story deals with a mind possibly turning against itself, our next tale ventures even deeper into the impossible. This comes from another post on Glitch in the Matrix, from a user named Jennifer who experienced something that still defies explanation. Jennifer woke up one morning in her apartment, same as always. Got ready for work, same routine. But as she went through her day, she started noticing small things that were wrong. Her coworker mentioned a project they'd completed 2 months ago. Jennifer had no memory of this project. She checked her emails, her files, and found documentation of work she'd apparently done but couldn't remember doing. At lunch, her best friend referenced a trip they'd taken together to Portland. Jennifer had never been to Portland. Her friend showed her photos on her phone. There was Jennifer, clearly in Portland, at restaurants and landmarks she'd never visited. But she had no memory of the trip. That evening, Jennifer went home and checked her apartment more carefully. There was a bookshelf in her bedroom that hadn't been there before. Or rather, it had been there, but against a different wall. She was certain of it. But when she asked her roommate insisted the shelf had always been in its current location. In her closet, there were clothes Jennifer didn't recognize. Nice clothes, her size, her style, but she had no memory of buying them. The wrongness escalated over the following days. Small details continued to be different. A scar on her hand that she'd had since childhood was on the wrong hand. She mentioned this to her mother, who looked at her strangely and said the scar had always been on her left hand. Jennifer was certain it had been on her right. Her car was a different color. She'd driven a blue Honda for 3 years. Now it was silver. The registration showed she'd bought a silver Honda 3 years ago. But Jennifer's memories insisted it had been blue. Street names in her neighborhood were different. Not completely different, but wrong enough to notice. A street she'd always known as Maple Drive was now Maple Lane. A coffee shop called The Grind was now called The Daily Grind. Jennifer felt like she was losing her mind. But all the evidence suggested these details had always been this way. Everyone around her confirmed the current reality. Photos, documents, other people's memories all contradicted what Jennifer remembered. She posted on Glitch in the Matrix asking if anyone else had experienced something similar. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people who'd noticed similar discrepancies. Memories that didn't match current reality. Mandela effects on a personal scale. Some suggested Jennifer had experienced a shift between parallel universes, that she'd somehow slipped from one timeline into another that was almost identical but with small variations. In her original timeline, her car was blue. The scar was on her right hand. The bookshelf was against the west wall. But now she was in a timeline where those details were slightly different. Others suggested false memory syndrome, that Jennifer's brain was confusing details or conflating different memories, that the stress of everyday life had caused her to misremember small things, and confirmation bias was making her find more and more discrepancies. But Jennifer was insistent. These weren't vague recollections or uncertain memories. She had vivid, clear memories of a reality that apparently never existed. And the sheer number of discrepancies, all appearing suddenly, seemed beyond normal memory errors. The most unsettling comment on her post came from a theoretical physicist who lurked on the subreddit. He explained that according to some interpretations of quantum mechanics, every decision, every quantum event, creates a branch in reality. Most of the time, we stay in our branch, but quantum decoherence isn't perfect. Theoretically, under the right conditions, a consciousness could shift from one branch to another. The branches would be nearly identical. Same people, same history, but with small variations. Things that wouldn't affect the broad strokes of reality, but would be noticeable to someone who remembered the other version. He couldn't explain what conditions might cause such a shift, or whether it was even possible outside of theoretical mathematics. But he acknowledged that Jennifer's experience was consistent with what someone would experience if they had jumped between very similar parallel realities. Jennifer's post ended with a question that's even more disturbing than the one Marcus asked after his coma dream. She asked, "If this happened to me, how many times has it happened? How many times have I shifted between realities without noticing? How many of my memories are from timelines I'm no longer in? And how many times will it happen again? What if we're all constantly shifting between nearly identical realities, and we only notice when we pay close enough attention? What if your memories of yesterday are from a different timeline than the one you're in today, and you'll never know unless you look for the small differences? Check your scars. Are they on the hand you remember? Check your car. Is it the color you think it is? Ask your friends about shared memories. Do they remember them the same way you do? And if you find discrepancies, what then? Do you accept that your memory is faulty? Or do you consider the possibility that you've been sliding between realities your entire life, never quite staying in one place, always shifting through infinite variations of almost the same existence? Jennifer stopped posting after that initial thread. Like Marcus, she vanished from Reddit. I don't know if she found explanations, found peace, or just decided to stop looking for the glitches. But I know that since reading her story, I've checked my scars. I've looked at old photos, verified memories with family and friends, and I've found small discrepancies that I can't quite explain. Maybe they're just normal memory errors. Probably they are. But maybe not. And once you start looking for the cracks in reality, it's very hard to stop. From reality shifts to stalkers, our next story brings us back to physical, human terror. This is the story of the man in the yellow raincoat, posted by a user we'll call Andrea. Andrea was in college when it started. She first noticed the man during her sophomore year. He was standing across the street from her dorm, wearing a bright yellow raincoat despite the fact that it wasn't raining. Just standing there, facing her building. At first, she didn't think much of it. Weird, but college campuses attract weird people. She assumed he was waiting for someone, but then she saw him again the next day. Same spot, same yellow raincoat. Just standing and watching. Andrea mentioned it to her roommate, who hadn't noticed the man. But over the following weeks, Andrea saw him constantly, always at a distance, always in that yellow raincoat, always watching. He appeared outside her classes, in the parking lot of her grocery store, standing on the street corner near the restaurant where she worked part-time. Never approaching, never interacting, just watching. Andrea went to campus police. They took a report, but said unless he made threats or attempted contact, there wasn't much they could do. They increased patrols around her dorm, but never spotted the man. The stalking continued for months. Andrea changed her routine, varied her schedule, but the man in the yellow raincoat always found her. She'd turn a corner and see him half a block away. She'd look out her dorm window and spot him across the quad. She started documenting it, taking photos whenever she saw him, but the man was always too far away for the pictures to be useful. A yellow blur in the background, a figure too distant to identify. Then it escalated. Andrea started finding items outside her dorm room door. A yellow flower, a postcard with no message, a small toy raincoat. Nothing directly threatening, but the message was clear. He knew exactly where she lived. He could reach her door anytime he wanted. Campus security still found nothing. The man never appeared on security cameras, despite being spotted multiple times in areas that were surveilled. Andrea graduated and moved to a different city for a job. She was relieved, certain that leaving would end the stalking. It didn't. Within a week of moving to her new apartment, Andrea saw him again. The man in the yellow raincoat, standing on her street, watching her building. The stalking continued for another 2 years. Different city, same pattern. Always watching, always at a distance. Never approaching, but always there. Andrea went to police again. They ran patrols, checked for registered sex offenders in the area, found nothing. Without a clear threat or actual approach, they couldn't make an arrest even if they found him. Andrea felt like she was losing her mind. Everyone told her to get cameras, get pepper spray, take self-defense classes. She did all of it. But none of it stopped the man from appearing, from watching, from letting her know he was always there. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Andrea realized she hadn't seen the man in the yellow raincoat in over a month. Then 2 months. Then 6. She was afraid to hope it was over, convinced he'd reappear the moment she let her guard down. But he never did. Years passed. Andrea moved again, started a new job, met someone, got married. No sign of the man in the yellow raincoat. She posted her story on Let's Not Meet 5 years after the stalking had ended, still trying to understand what had happened. The comments were full of speculation. Some thought the stalker had died or been arrested for another crime. Others suggested he'd moved on to a different victim, someone else who was now living Andrea's nightmare. But one comment stood out. A user claimed to have experienced something similar. A stalker who appeared constantly for years, then vanished without explanation. This user had eventually learned, through a private investigator, that their stalker had been part of a gang initiation. Stalking a random target for a set period without being caught was the test. Once the period was complete, the stalker moved on. If this was true for Andrea's case, it means the man in the yellow raincoat stalked her for over 3 years, possibly longer, as part of some ritualistic game. He made it his mission to terrify her, to invade her sense of safety. Not because of anything she'd done, but because she'd been randomly selected as a target. And when the game was over, he simply stopped and walked away, leaving Andrea with years of trauma and fear and no explanation, no closure, no justice. Andrea ended her post with a warning. If you notice someone appearing too often in your life, if you see the same person in different locations over days or weeks, trust your instincts. Document everything. Tell people. Don't dismiss it as coincidence or paranoia, because somewhere out there might be a man in a yellow raincoat watching you. And you won't know why. You won't know when it will end. You'll just know that you're being hunted, slowly, patiently, by someone who enjoys the power of making you afraid. And that might be the most terrifying mystery of all. Not the dramatic violence, but the slow, calculated psychological torture of being watched by someone whose motivations you'll never understand. From a stalker who watched from the outside, we move to something even more violating. A terror that comes from inside your own home. This is about frogging, and it's exactly as horrifying as it sounds. The term frogging refers to people secretly living in someone else's home without their knowledge. Hiding in attics, basements, crawl spaces, or storage areas, coming out when the residents are asleep or away, using their food, their bathroom, their space. The user, we'll call her Maria, posted her experience on Let's Not Meet, and it's the stuff of nightmares. Maria lived alone in a small house she rented. It was an older home with an attic access panel in the hallway ceiling. She'd never been up there, never had a reason to. She started noticing small things going wrong. Food disappearing from her refrigerator. Not entire meals, just small amounts. Half a sandwich she'd saved for lunch would be gone. Leftovers reduced by a few bites. She assumed she was misremembering how much she'd eaten. Then her things started moving. Keys that she'd left on the kitchen counter would be on the coffee table. Books would be on different shelves. Again, small things, easy to dismiss as her own forgetfulness. But then came the shower. Maria woke up one morning and found her bathroom floor wet. Not damp, soaking wet, with fresh footprints leading from the shower to the bathroom door. She lived alone. She hadn't showered the night before. Now she was scared. She checked all the locks on her doors and windows. Everything was secure, locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. But someone had used her shower while she slept. Maria called the police. They searched the house, found nothing, and suggested maybe she'd sleepwalked and showered without remembering. Maria knew this wasn't true, but she had no proof. She bought a motion-activated camera and set it up in her hallway, pointing at the bathroom door. The next morning, she checked the footage. At 3 a.m., the camera had captured movement. The attic access panel in the ceiling slowly opened. A man's legs appeared, then his body, as he carefully lowered himself down from the attic. He walked to the bathroom, used it, then opened Maria's refrigerator and ate food directly from the containers. He spent 20 minutes in her house, moving through her space as if he owned it, while she slept unaware in her bedroom 30 feet away. He climbed back into the attic and replaced the access panel. Maria watched this footage in absolute horror. A stranger had been living in her attic. For how long? Weeks? Months? How many nights had he been above her, listening to her live, waiting for her to sleep so he could come down and invade her space? She called the police immediately. When they arrived and searched the attic, they found a disturbing nest. Blankets, food wrappers, water bottles, a collection of Maria's belongings he'd stolen, photos of her taken from her own albums, items of her clothing, and a journal. Pages and pages of observations about Maria, her schedule, her habits, what time she went to bed, what she ate, phone conversations she'd had that he'd overheard from the attic. He'd been documenting her life in meticulous detail. The man wasn't there when police searched. He'd apparently left earlier that night, before Maria had checked the camera footage. Police set up surveillance, but he never returned. He knew the camera was there, knew he'd been caught, They identified him from the footage. A drifter with a history of breaking and entering, but no prior record of this kind of extended invasion. He'd been arrested in a different state 3 weeks later for attempting to break into another home. He's in prison now, but he never explained how long he'd been living in Maria's attic or how he'd chosen her as a target. The comments on Maria's post were full of similar stories. People who'd found evidence of strangers living in their walls, their basements, their attics. One user described finding a man living in their crawl space for over 6 months. Another found a woman had been sleeping in their garage, coming into the house at night to shower and eat. Frogging is more common than most people realize. It typically happens in larger houses, buildings with multiple units, or homes with areas that residents don't regularly check. The froggers are often homeless or mentally ill, looking for shelter, but some are predators, specifically targeting victims to stalk and terrorize. Since reading Maria's story, I check my attic every month. I've put locks on access panels. I'm aware of how much food is in my refrigerator, how much water I use, any signs that someone might be in my space when I'm not looking. Because the most terrifying intruder isn't the one who breaks in and leaves. It's the one who breaks in and stays, who lives above you, beside you, around you, watching and waiting. And you never know they're there until it's too late. Our next case has captivated internet sleuths for over a decade. It's the death of Elisa Lam, and while it's been officially solved, the circumstances are so bizarre that many people still believe there's more to the story. In February 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam was found dead in a water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Guests had been complaining for days about low water